Once in mythical Spain, and in one of their many moments of confusion, Don Quixote tells Sancho, "Is it possible that in the time that you have been with me, Sancho, you have not yet found out that all the adventures of a knight errant appear to be illusions, follies and dreams, but turn out to be the reverse? This is not because things are really so, but because in our midst there is a host of enchanters, forever changing, disguising, and transforming our affairs as they please, according to whatever they wish to favor or destroy us. So that what you call a barber's basin is to me Mambrino's helmet, and to another person it will appear to be something else entirely." And this is very appropriate for the strange times that we're going through, because it does seem that our reality is being warped by centers that we cannot perceive. And what to this show looks like a global coup, to many, many others looks like a benevolent government trying to protect its citizens. And if there's some kind of enchantment at the basis of it all, who better to ask than an enchanter? So today, a very special guest, Brian Halliday, an enchanter, a hypnotist by profession, and a businessman who has created a special program to first help people deprogram themselves from the propaganda they've been receiving 24/7, and secondly, to thrive in their own business by using some hypnotic techniques to close deals with partners. Brian, thank you very, very much for being in our show.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Looking forward to it.
So I first came in contact with your material through another great guest that we had, John Waters, an Irish journalist. I know he doesn't like to be called that any longer, but for lack of a better term, who's been very, very, very vocal against what's been going on. And he linked in one of his articles, I'm going to put the link below, to one of your videos. And I was immediately fascinated that essentially what you were saying is that you, whenever you watch the mainstream media, recognize techniques that you've been using as a hypnotist. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, mainly from my last life when I was a full-time stage hypnotist and I used to work theatres. I was actually shocked when within hours of this media campaign starting over in the UK, because I could recognise immediately what they were doing, and as it unfolded, I mean, I was just walking about with a big smile on my face, because almost step by step they were producing the same sort of techniques that I would do on a regular basis on a stage in front of an audience in a theatre.
Wow. If I were to ask you to give examples of that, what could you give us?
Well, the first example that was the early example was when our Prime Minister, Boris, just before all this kicked off, he got on the news and he declared that everybody was going to lose at least one member of their family. That was a big red flag to me right away, because if we were going through a real crisis, I would imagine a government would want to guide us through safely and keep us calm. But the media, right from the offset, from the very first declaration from our Prime Minister, was to install fear and get people's emotions raised high. And to me, that was a red flag, because that's how hypnosis works on the stage. You want to get the people, that the whole process leading up to the show is designed to get people into a high emotional state, usually fear or excitement, because that makes people much more suggestible. So that was the first flag. And then when I was next again day, I was going about supermarkets and I was watching people fight for toilet paper and kitchen roll and tins of tomato. I mean, they were literally fighting, and half the shelves were away. I just walked about with a smile on my face, because I realised what was happening. They were inducing fear and panic, because when you induce fear and panic, people are much more suggestible. And so the way I would do that on the stage, for example, I would do a number of things. First of all, I would have these really quite scary posters that would go out weeks before to start to raise people's emotional states around fear and excitement. But on the actual night, I would be due to go and say for a midnight show at midnight, but I wouldn't walk on till 1:15, and so people really didn't know what was happening. And then when I was just about to start, I would put the whole theatre in darkness so you couldn't see the person next to you. And so all that was done to try and create confusion, and so that people, they don't have the normal references.
Reminds social distancing. This technique reminds social distancing, the putting people
Well,
in dark.
the darkness was to create chaos, right? And the whole idea about chaos is when you create chaos, the normal parameters or framework that people hang their realities on are just blown away. So the mind's in confusion and chaos, and it's looking for a way out. And one of the metaphors I like using is that if you could imagine you're at sea and you're drowning, if a boat pulls up and offers you a life belt, you don't care what's on that boat. You just want to get out of it. And so that's what the government was doing. It was creating chaos by keeping changing they would promise things and they would keep changing the goalposts. And even Boris, in a couple of his TV appearances, didn't turn up late. He would turn up 2 hours late. So a lot of the things they were doing in the media was almost identical to what I was doing. But it was all about creating this initial chaos and keeping people in this high state of fear, so that they were suggestible for all other suggestions that they were going to start pouring in throughout the media.
Right. And just to do my due as an amateur interviewer, journalist, I need to play devil's advocate a little bit, so that people who are not convinced get their fair share of the hearing, and perhaps people who are convinced too early also question their own beliefs. What elements of this whole media campaign convinced you that it was not just about trying to protect people? I mean, if the government was really afraid, objectively, honestly afraid of this virus and wanted to just protect its citizens, wouldn't it also do something similar? Try to get them to obey, essentially. Like, what told you that there is some kind of foul play there?
You're right, because it is possible that they could have used it for either purpose. But the reason why I personally seen it as foul play right away was I started looking into this stuff about 10 years ago, and I was expecting something big to happen, but I didn't know what it was. And in the minute this took off, just in my gut, because of all the other stuff I looked at, I just knew that this was it.
Oh, this was it.
This was the big transition. This was the big thing that was coming. I'd known about it for years. I've been following political correctness. I've been watching freedom of speech being shut down. I'd had my own personal experiences, which led me to get onto this kind of study. So I knew some kind of control and some kind of change was coming, but I didn't know what it was. To be honest with you, I thought it was going to be mass immigration with asylum seekers, etc., etc., like had been done in parts of Europe. I thought that's what was coming to the UK. But when this happened, I realised right away, no, this is what's going to happen. So I knew something was coming just because of the previous years following the media and a personal experience I had about 10 years ago, which led me on this path. I knew something was coming. So when it came, it was just obvious to me that this was the transition and the change that and how it was going to be delivered.
Could I ask you to share parts of this experience?
Well, right, okay. My mother, in her house, 2 migrants moved above us, right? And there was only meant to be 2 people above us, but within a week or so, there was over 20 of them living above us. And they also made a little make-do church at the end of the street, and members of the church would be up and down the stairs on a regular basis, and they would be going up for showers, etc. So the shower was left on all the time, and what happened was it flooded right through all the ceilings, the toilet roof came down, etc., etc., and my house was a mess. And so we tried to report it to the police, local authorities. Nobody would talk to us, and even I had friends who were a member of the NLP party, the SNP party over here. Had friends who were too frightened to even talk about it in public, and so I knew something was happening, because here I was trapped in a situation and there was nobody I could turn to. Everybody was just shutting down, and I'd never really realised that before. So that this system was in place. So I went to the local council, I put in a couple of complaints. Then eventually, after about, what happened was the whole ceiling came down, the plaster and all that. And it took me 5 or 6 months to get anybody to even respond. And by that time, we'd put up a second ceiling. And now the second ceiling was coming in. It was starting to crack and bow. And so when I went along to the council, what happened was that they said they would look into it. So what happened was when I came back, I spoke to some of my neighbours, and they said the council had knocked on their doors, and they weren't looking into the situation that I was in. They were actually asking around to see if I was racist. So then I realised there was some kind of system in place that was closing down this agenda, and this. At one time, it was the big number one thing back then was everybody was absolutely terrified of being called racist because they could be cancelled, they could lose their careers. And it's still like that now. And so this went on, and the ceiling came in a second time, and the water started gushing down, and it was like a broken pipe. So I phoned the emergency services, and I went up the stairs, and I spoke to the people above the stairs, and I says, look, you can't leave right now because I think there's a broken pipe, and the emergency people will need to get in to the premises. So what happened was, by the time they closed the door and I got to the bottom of the stairs, the water had stopped. They'd obviously just turned the shower off, so they must have had the shower going on all the time. So the emergency services came out, and they just seen the drips and the big hole in the ceiling, and they said, there's nothing we can do. So I almost begged them. I says, look, the minute you go, they're going to turn this water on again, and it's just going to go through the kitchen and all that kind of stuff. And so he looked at me, he went back up the stairs, and he came back down, and he says, this is the first time in 20 years working in this job whereby I've given them a legal injunction, and I'm also doing it with the landlord. So if they turn the tap on and use it, they'll be taken to court and fined. So once I had that validation and these legal things, I could then go back to the council, and I went to a councillor, and it went right to the top of the council, and it turned out that the people at the bottom didn't progress the problem any further up, which they should have done. Basically, out of fear, everybody was absolutely terrified to deal with this in case they lost their job through racism. Now, the racism threat is still big right now, but that was the main threat back then. But what I'm seeing right now is the same sort of process, but now it's all around being an anti-vaxxer. And so that's what the media is building up now, that the biggest crime that you can do right now is to be an anti-vaxxer.
Yes, yes.
And the same process is working.
Yeah, and just to relate something personal, because last month I was thinking about this a lot, and I've been discussing it with a friend who's publishing has an online publication, I guess you would call it, of the dissident right. I am 1776. I'm going to put a link below. And I was saying that, just until yesterday, quote unquote, last year, I guess is what I meant, we were very worried about all this insanity that had to do with woke culture and being called a racist for reporting rotten plumbing, But now, just like you said, Brian, I also feel that we were almost fighting ghosts, almost like Don Quixote as I opened this episode, as if all these issues that are important, of course, mass migration in Europe, especially when it's done against the people's wills, as it is, it's obviously an issue, but it seems almost like this was the vanguard of something bigger, and I can't wrap my head around it. I just have this feeling that all these issues that I spent a lot of time in the past year to articulate and to read enough so that I have the intellectual framework to counter, to analyze, to understand, so that we keep the war in the intellectual sphere as I would like it to be. And I was spending a lot of time reading, trying to understand where all these notions came from. And just as I was wrapping my head around these very kind of postmodern liberal ideas, then COVID hit, and then it felt like I was barking up the wrong tree in a way. So it seems that you had the similar experience.
Yeah, I knew something was coming, but I thought it was going to be the. I still think the mass migration is going to happen. Um, I mean, it's quite interesting to note that the same people that are displacing these poor people from the Middle East are then trying to look good by telling us to open our doors and allow them in. So it just seems to be it's a whole part of it's a whole part of a bigger plan to break down Europe, and ultimately break down nation states and move towards globalism. That's really what's happening.
And just because you mentioned the police, I mean, we need to just pause and think about this. Like, what can make an average police officer in Scotland, or in Greece for that matter, behave in such a way? Go around asking if you're a racist for reporting damage done to your flat. Like, what's going on through this person's head?
Well, it wasn't the police; it was the council. But I would have guessed the police would also act the same. And I think at the moment, with the political correctness and the absolute terror of being labelled a racist, is they probably were going through the process to check to see if I was racist to put them in a safer place to cover their backs. I think that's what was happening, if you see what I mean. Everybody's absolutely terrified to make the wrong move in case they're called a racist. I mean, you see it all the time with comedians, with people in the media, and also people who actually work in ordinary jobs. They say the slightest thing that can be construed or perceived in the wrong way, and whole careers get lost. And I think what's happening is people are becoming like really afraid, and so what they do is they stick with the processes that cover their back. So by them investigating the racism part, they're protecting the 20 odd people who were living above me because they were protected, if you like, rather than risk the chance of being called a
Them
racist.
being called a racist, I
Yeah.
guess. But it goes one step further, and just like, and I thank you for sharing this very personal experience with us. And so I want to reciprocate and share a personal experience, which is slightly on the lighter side, funnier, but on the same vein. And it has to do with my father, like yours had to do with your mother. And back in the first lockdown, I think I've mentioned this before, it's worth mentioning again. Back in the first lockdown, me and my father would meet in a little park, I guess 15 minutes from my house and my office, somewhere in the middle, and have a coffee on the benches. Which was technically not allowed, but we thought that, it's very reasonable for us to do so. So we each traveled from house and office, got a coffee in hand, and sat. One day I go to this park and I see my father surrounded by 5 police officers. And I immediately think that something must have happened, some kind of robbery, and my father was witness, right? But as I approach, I see that no, they're actually talking to my father and they're ready to arrest him. So I ask them what happened, and they say he was sitting on a bench. That was his crime, I guess. And my father was offended, so he came out a little harshly against them, not swearing, because that's not my father's way. But he said that he's going to report them, so they got a little harsher. And then my father said, you know what, let's drop it. Let's drop the whole thing. I'm not going to report you. I'm just going to leave you go back to your business. I go back to mine. But by that time, they were already agitated. And somehow my father thought that it was all about what he said. So he turns around and says, look, man, and they were all men, of course. He said, look, man, I'm telling you in my man's honor, I'm not going to press charges, he said, in my man's honor. And what do these police officers reply? That is sexist.
Right.
Okay. And I'm thinking this, like, beyond the surrealness of an older man not being able to sit on the bench, have a coffee, being arrested, despite the surrealness, I just kept wondering, where did this idea of a man's honor being sexist come to this young man's head? Because it did not come from real life experience. It did not come from living and observing how men and women behave. It must have come from somewhere else. So I want to ask you, is there before this last year, a kind of hypnosis that's been going on throughout these last years?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's ruled with fear as well, but political correctness is really just aimed to control your thoughts, to control your behaviour, and it's done through fear. It's kind of like a more subtle version of what's just happened, and it's, from what I understand, it's just a modern version of Marxism. What they've done is they've created identity politics, and what they're doing is they're weakening the culture by attacking the culture. Where the original Marxist plan was that the wealthy would be put against the working class, and the working class would win, and they would then become internationalists, in other words, globalists. The world would come together. But the truth is that people in the West became richer, they became wealthier, and they had a lot more freedoms with the Western culture. So Marx never realised his dream. So the neo-Marxists, the postmodernists who came along, what they've done is instead of putting the working class against the wealthy, what they're doing now is they're creating all these identity politics with all these protected groups, and what they're basically doing now is they're putting all the groups against each other, and that's basically what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And just to go back into your own history, like you said, how did you come into hypnosis as a craft, and then as a profession, and then now as, I guess, a deconstructor of the global narrative? Like, what has been this journey for you?
I actually have always had a fascination for hypnosis, even when I was at school, and I got a tiny little book, and I started hypnotising people at school really badly. So it's something that I've done more or less all my life, to some extent, or it's an interest I've had. But I trained with a stage hypnotist around about 1989, 91, and I then started to do stage shows, and that's how I started with hypnosis. The big thing that really fascinated me about hypnosis when I first started was that if you take a group of people through a simple ritual or process, and you structure your language in a specific way, you can have a profound impact upon the perceptions. You can make them see things that are not there. You can make them not be able to see things that are there. You can remove other inhibitions. You can make them behave in ways they wouldn't normally do. But the big thing that really impressed me back then was that vast majority of people on the stage had complete amnesia for the whole experience. And the thing is, as the years went by and I started to move away from stage hypnosis, I started to recognise the same patterns in everyday behaviour, and came to the conclusion that hypnosis isn't anything special. What you see on the stage happens all the time, day to day in your daily interactions, and what you believe and the emotions that you experience, and how you view the world through these emotions, and also how you structure your words and how you the words that you use has a profound impact upon you and the people around you. So really, we're basically in a trance all the time. We move from one trance to another trance. And when people come to see me for therapy, for example, they might be depressed, right? So the way I see it is they're in a depressed trance. They're seeing the world through a series of emotions which they haven't resolved, and some beliefs and some things that are happening also in their outside world. So when somebody comes to see me, what the first thing we do is we pull them out of that trance, and we build a trance which is going to work for them, and I put them in a new trance and send them out the door. But my belief is basically that just like fish cannot live out of water, we can't exist without being in some kind of trance.
Yes, it's one trance or the other, I guess. But
Uh-huh.
although the master of trances, I guess, such as yourself, has a privileged access to these trances, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was recommending for people who were caught up in this propaganda, there's people on one side who are absolutely terrified of this supposedly deadly virus, and then there's people on the other side who believe they are awake, and they believe that you know they believe that they are awake, but in actual fact, they're just as much in a trance as the people on the other side. In fact, they're two extreme ends of the spectrum. And when I talk about this, what I'm really talking about is the nature of duality, and that one thing can't exist without another. Because you need it to compare. So, for example, daytime wouldn't exist if you didn't have nighttime. If you couldn't compare it with nighttime, there wouldn't be a daytime. Good couldn't exist without bad, because without bad, good just couldn't exist. And that goes through just about anything in nature. There's a polarity. And so with the propaganda, there's this polarity where on one end you've got people who totally believe in the virus, and on the other end you have the people who don't believe the virus, but they're totally focused on a dystopian future and where they believe they're being led to. However, both ends are basically living at these extremes as if they were happening, and both of them are experiencing very similar emotions of fear and frustration and anger. And when you are living through emotions of fear and anger, they're like lenses. You see the world that way, and it becomes real to you. And the other thing, what you're doing is you're actually spending 24 hours every day running these thoughts through your head, and that's exactly where the elites want us to be. They want us to put all our attention, all our energy, and all our time into thinking about them. Because when you are in a state of fear, the first thing you're doing is you're feeding their beast, you're feeding their machine. But secondly, you're in a mental prison. Because if you think about life in general, right, life is only made up of two elements, basically, time and energy, and we only have finite amounts of both. And so if you're giving all your attention, your time and energy to this agenda, then what you're doing is you're exactly where they want you to be, because you're not focusing on creating the life that you want. And that's what they want. You're actually helping them create the agenda, because we are all sort of, if you like, manifestation machines. And if one side is running the dystopian future and living in that dystopian future, if it's happened, they're actually helping that to be created. Whereas the people on the other side who are complying and locking down, they're helping create the conditions of being locked down. So really, what the answer is to transcend duality. And what I mean by that is you become totally detached from the whole thing, and you basically become an observer of what's happening. And so it doesn't matter what media, if it's alternative media or if it's mainstream media, you basically start to really limit your time that you spend looking at the media, and you stop running the stuff through your head, and you start taking time out and really thinking about how you want to create the world around you and the results that you want.
Yes, and that is definitely something that I've been guilty. Being something of a dissident in this COVIDtopia future. I have been thinking too much about the dystopian aspect of it. I'm willing to confess, and it has come to my attention that perhaps I'm also feeding the beast, as careful as I try to be with my analysis, researching my sources, my references, not falling for the cheap scaremongering. But still, I think you're absolutely right that just thinking about it makes it stronger. Can you actually give us an example of a stage technique where somehow focusing one's thoughts can manifest some kind of reality?
Well, if you actually think about what's happening now, right, from what my understanding is, this thing that's unfolding right now is just basically a huge manifestation of thoughts that's been going on for a couple of hundred years. It goes back, I believe, to Albert Pike, who was one of the first Freemasons, and they were speaking about this one world government and the New World Order, or whatever you want to call it. They were talking about it way back then. And since that time, it's been planned and thought about. And so what you're actually seeing right now is the manifestation of somebody's thoughts. So basically, everything that exists around you, just look around, it started off as a thought in somebody's head and was manifested into reality. And if you look at anything that you've achieved in your life, you first of all, you pictured it, you imagined what it'd be like to have it, and then later on you had it, and that means good stuff and bad stuff. So for example, if you're in a particular type of job that needed qualifications, at one point you had to imagine what it'd be like to be at university and then see the end result. So basically everything that exists in the world of form or in the physical world originated as a thought, which then goes through a protest and then becomes reality. So that's just the basic idea behind manifestation. It's nothing really mystical. It's just basically how life works.
Wow. And I just to add like a little bit of history, it's always seemed very interesting to me how the United Nations, that is a seemingly innocent organization that tries to bring world peace, actually had a very strong, dare I say, dystopian agenda right in its inception. Julian Huxley, who was the first director, was brother to Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World.
All right.
And whoever reads Brave New World, and then the the Declaration of the United Nations, this world organization, will find similarities in the idea of a planned future of total control, whereby man is to be engineered to be better and more compliant to a global order. You find these elements very blatantly stated in the United Nations, I guess, if not charter, then the inaugural declaration written by Julian Huxley. So I imagine these two brothers, over the dinner table, one a fiction writer, the other the director of one of the largest world organizations, talking about these same things, almost like the fiction had to be put out there so that people get enough of it in their mind, so when it starts to become a political project, they're ready. Right? Would that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's known as predictive programming, and that's the thing that's one of the really early thoughts that came into my mind when I seen people panicking and panic buying in the shops and fighting over things. The first thing I thought about all the disaster movies that I've seen over the years, and the zombie movies and all that kind of stuff. It was almost like people were trained to behave in a certain way. It was almost like they had a blueprint in their mind to behave in a certain way when there was such a crisis, because it looked like a movie to me when I seen everybody fighting in the supermarkets. And what you just mentioned is quite true as well. You can actually find this isn't conspiracy theory. You can actually find things like this on formal websites. In fact, even more recently, is it Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum is talking about using COVID as a mechanism to start the Great Reset. And one of the things they want by 2030 is that nobody will own anything and everybody will be happy. And so that's where they want to push us. And if you actually go onto the World Economic website and do a little bit digging, you'll find that they actually joined forces with the United Nations in 2019 to bring about the Great Reset. So it's all there, you can find it, they're not even hiding it. And there's videos on YouTube, there's documentaries going about where we've got all our leaders in Davos, where they meet every year, and Klaus Schwab talking about all these things. And you get our Prime Minister, you get Biden, you've got all the world leaders there, all talking at these events, and all talking about bringing this control in. So it's not even hidden. I mean, if you want to go and find it, it's easy to find.
Yet, when you show this data to people, they turn the other way, as if they don't want to see it. So I think that could qualify as a hypnotic reaction.
Yeah, well, what happens with people like that is that so basically we're receiving suggestions all the time from the media, from our friends, etc., etc. The people who responded to the fear, basically what happens is that when you become emotional about something, right, and if that emotion lasts long enough, you form a belief around it. So for example, when our government started to tell us we were going to lose somebody close to us and there was this dangerous virus about, right, if you take that on board and you allow that to create a state of fear, and you run that fear around long enough, and it doesn't have to be that long, what you do is you form a belief. Once you form a belief and you have that emotion, you basically start to see the world that way, as if it really is that way, and you also start to filter out any evidence that shows the opposite, right? And if that continues, that emotion, long enough, and again, it doesn't have to be too long, especially at such a high level, and with the media totally. If that emotion runs for another length of time, it moves from a belief into a conviction. Now, a conviction is a belief, but it's sandboxed. It like operates on its own, and because it's sandboxed, it basically means it's protected from any new information that comes out. It will just be, just won't be able to process it. They'll reject it, and in some cases, it will be actually quite painful to even consider the opposite, and that's why people get really angry and can become aggressive if you try and show them stats and information.
Yeah, and I guess you're the right man to ask, because I did want to ask this for a long time. Is this anger reaction telling of someone who's been hypnotized in a life?
Well, I've got a different view about hypnosis in general, right? I believe if you experience any intense emotion, that's basically a sign that you are in a trance. And the reason why I say that is because whenever you experience an intense emotion, it's almost like putting on a lens or a pair of glasses. So, for example, if you're really angry, you put on this lens, your angry lens, and you see all the reasons to be angry. If you put on a fear lens, you see the world as a fearful, dangerous place. And it's all in your imagination because there's no bodies in the street. But you imagine somewhere in a hospital or somewhere, thousands of people are dying, and you could be next. And that's your reality. And so likewise, if you are really frightened about the dystopian future, you basically see it. You just don't see a way out of it, and you just see the world becoming a dystopian nightmare. But when you actually pull yourself out of these emotions, the first thing I suggest to people is whenever they feel they've been triggered and an emotion's been triggered, that's the start of you being sucked into a trance. And what you need to do is step back and not get involved, especially if it involves arguing and debating with people on the other side. It just puts both of you deeper into the extreme sides that you're in. So what you really need to do is pull yourself out of that emotional state and ground yourself. And once you pull yourself out of that emotional state, you can observe things and see them a lot more clearly. And the other side is that when you come out of all these intense emotional states, you start to see some really beautiful things happening and unfolding all the time around you. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, I've been having a really good time just every day, just enjoying life. There's an example that just came into my head the other week there. I bought a book from Amazon, and it went to a shop. I got it delivered to a shop because I'm not home a lot of the time. So I got in my car and I drove a couple of miles to get this book. And then I came out. It was a beautiful sunny day, so I thought, oh, I'll start reading this book. So I sat down in a chair in the middle of the street, and it was quite a busy street. And behind me was a cafe, if you like. And there was this woman and man sitting outside, and I don't know if they were the owners or whatever, but they had Brazilian music playing. And this bus came along, and it stopped at the traffic lights. And all of a sudden, this lady jumped up and started to do a Brazilian dance on a summer's day with the music blaring. And the whole bus at the top, all the young girls were, there was about 10 or 15 young girls at the top of the bus, and they all jumped up and started dancing along beside her. And that was just for a few moments before the lights changed, and it just brought such a big smile to my face. And there's lots of things like that. I mean, there's a lot of good things happening in life right now that you miss because you can't see them if you're in this trance, because you can only see through whatever lens that you're playing. And if it's fear or anger, you see the place as an aggressive or a dangerous place, and you miss all this stuff.
That's a beautiful thing. And yeah, I mean, just to bring a bit of philosophy, I guess, I was also reading Heidegger, as you mentioned, books, who's a very difficult philosopher to wrap your head around. But one of the things he was saying in his great book, Being in Time, is that there's kind of no neutral discovery. Everything we discover in this world is through perhaps what you call a lens, what he calls attunement. So things appear as you fill the gap as fearful, as beautiful, as they never appear objective. You can put them in a lab, dissect them and make them objective, but that's not how they appear initially. Your emotion, your attunement, as Heidegger would say, uncovers beings, brings them forth. So that just reminded me of what you were saying, Brian.
Well, that's true. I think reality isn't fixed, and you have all these different versions of reality. And for example, once you tune into the beautiful stuff that's happening around you, and you come out of this trance that the media is pushing upon you, not only do you start to see the good things. It's a bit like when I spoke about stage hypnosis, for example. I could hypnotize people on stage and I could make myself invisible. They couldn't see me, right? Or I would make them see things that weren't there, right? And this everyday trance that I'm speaking about has the same way of configuring your perceptions. So when you're basically in an anger or a fear trance because of the propaganda, you see things that aren't there. You see lots of dead people. I mean, not literally in the streets, but you see them somewhere, right? But at the same time, you don't see the beautiful side of things. But if you're a businessman, right, all you basically see are the restrictions, and you can't see a way forward. You miss the opportunities. When you reconfigure your mind in a different way, you don't actually see the problems. You don't see all this rubbish that the media is trying to put on us. You basically see opportunities, and you see a nicer, softer world, and you see a way forward, if that makes sense. And because you see a way forward, your behaviour changes, and you start to manifest things that you want. You start to create life the way you want it to be. And I believe if everybody did that, or a large portion of the world came out of this trance, this psychological prison that they've created for us, then I believe the agenda would fall apart in an incredibly short period of time. Because the only thing that holds us together is that we all take part in the psychological illusion that they're putting on us, whether it's at one end of the spectrum or the other. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it makes sense. And I know, just to jump on the business side of things, that you have a company that kind of does exactly that, helps people on an individual basis and helps people on as company owners to get out of a particular trance and perhaps into another one, right?
Yes, that's right.
And what have been the results so far?
Well, I actually broke away from that for quite a few years and came back recently. I just recently worked with a company who were based in Scotland, but they started up a branch, if you like, in Germany. They hadn't sold anything in Germany before, so I worked with them for the 6 months, and I just heard the sales guy that's working in Germany just heard a few days ago that they've pulled in 2 contracts, one worth 300,000 euros and another one worth 800,000 euros, and that's beating their annual target, and they did it in 4 months in a new country from a standstill. So that's one example, but I have lots of other examples. I've worked with prestige national prestige car dealerships, where I've helped them break sales records and with only 2 days trance training. Like, one guy went from selling 8 cars was his personal best. He went up to selling 15 cars a month, and he was selling the add-ons, his monthly add-ons. He was selling them, and he was reaching his targets in a week, which was quite good, because the sales teams that hadn't sold any of the add-ons in the couple of years that they had been there, and that's where all the profits were in Mercedes-Benz. And another example would be, I helped a national children's charity move a £240,000 corporate donation to a £1 million commitment in a single meeting with a few words and gestures. So, I mean, there's loads of I've worked with recruitment agencies. One of my clients won the contract to supply the labour for the Edinburgh Trams project, and I think that was worth about £300,000 to them. So, I mean, like, there's a lot of things like that. Mm-hmm. No, it's actually well. The first thing is you need to know the difference. I mean, like these are my meanings, right? But you need to know the difference between what I call persuasion and manipulation, right? And if you manipulate people and you lie to them and you try and trick them, you might get a sale, but it always backfires. So what I do with this is by what I do is I teach my clients to serve their clients at a much higher level by understanding them at a deeper level and helping them what they get, and then becoming part of that process to help them get what they want, and then the actual products and the services come later on. So instead of trying to sell products and services, I teach my clients first of all to remove all their limitations, if you like, and then secondly what I do is I teach them to open up their potential clients and help them reconnect with who they are and what they want to what's really important to them and what they want to achieve. And then at that point, if my clients can actually help them, they go ahead with the rest of the process. But if they can't help them, they have to walk away, because then they know whatever they get is going to be short lived. It's going to be built on a house of cards or a castle in the sand. It's going to fall apart. So once you open up your clients at the highest level, they feel understood. In fact, more understood than they've ever felt. And then you are then seen as part of an important key component for them achieving what they want at a higher level, and then you bring in your products and services and show them how you're going to do it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So it starts from oneself, I guess. And
Yes. Well, about 80% of all success is mindset, I believe.
and what are the most common blockers you see people in, like small businesses like myself, who are trying to become bigger? What is the most common blocker on this particular step?
Well, the most common thing is that, or the most, I think the most important thing you have to become aware of or understand is that just about everything we do is unconscious. We don't actually have much of a conscious mind. In fact, neuroscientists will tell us that we only use about 5 or 6% of our entire mental processes consciously. The rest is all unconscious. So we don't actually have much of a conscious mind. So for example, if I was to pick up a mug of coffee and put it to my lips, you might say that's a conscious decision, but it involves something like 120 muscles from my shoulder to my hand. You couldn't control all these muscles consciously. So we've got these programs that do it for us, right? And also we have got 50 pairs of muscles in our throat which help us swallow. Again, we couldn't control them consciously. And of course, where does the notion come from to be thirsty? That comes from somewhere else. So just about everything we do is unconscious. And if you think about ordinary everyday tasks, for example, think about running down a flight of stairs. Think about the biocomputations that you would need if you were trying to consciously move your body mass from the top of the stairs to the bottom of the stairs. It's huge. But we do this without thinking every day. In fact, if we were to consciously try and think about every step, we would trip up and fall all the way down to the bottom. And basically, the biggest thing that gets in the way is that people try to consciously to change things. And what they do is when you try to consciously change things, you basically trip up your unconscious programs that are the real force that do it for you. So the other thing about the unconscious process is we have what we call set points. And what I mean by a set point is where you're currently programmed to achieve at a certain level, and you basically can't go above that until you raise your set points, if that makes sense, right? So you have set points in every area of your life. You have them in your health, your finances, your business, your relationships. And if you currently want to know where your set points are set, what you basically do is you just look at how much money you've got in the bank, you look at the quality of your relationships, you look at how healthy you are, you look at where you are with your business or your sport or whatever it is. Because everything that you experience, all the good stuff and the bad stuff, is just an expression of what's going on inside. So a lot of people go on business courses, they go on sales trainings, and they get more strategies, they get more educated, but they don't actually do anything to raise their set points. And the way the set points actually work is they work in a channel. So you have a top part of your set point and you have a bottom part. So if you look back in the last 5 years of your life in any area, it doesn't go straight along, it moves up and down. So, for example, say you want to start your business, right? You start to kick in and you start to do all the right things, and maybe you've been on a few courses and you start to apply all the strategies, and things start to move up until you get to the top level of your channel. It's a place where you never break through from. And then what happens, you start to self-sabotage. You turn up late for meetings, you say stupid things, or you experience fear or anxiety, and you go and you shut right down and you procrastinate, and then you start to go all the way down your channel until you get to the bottom part. And then when you get to the bottom part, all your best resources kick in again, because this is the part you never go below. And then once again you start to move up your channel, and you move up and down. So this is why a lot of sales trainings and business trainings, they're not as effective as they could be, because you need a system to raise these set points. And so just by raising these set points in fear, I've seen salespeople's double or treble their sales in a really short period of time.
Because it sounds very, very technical. Like, what's the history? I always wanted to ask of all this. Like, does hypnotism go back to ancient Egypt, or what's the kind of short history of it all?
Well, James Braid was the Scottish doctor who started to heal people with magnetism, and I can't remember the actual dates, but it started off about 100 years ago or so. But yeah, I'm sure that hypnosis goes all the way back further. But you know, the kind of hypnosis that I'm really interested in is the everyday hypnosis. Seeing it, I don't actually see hypnosis as something that's separate from our everyday life. It's more to do with communicating on a deep level, really.
There was this concept called NLP. I think you even did a Freudian slip there. You said NLP.
That's right.
So we have to mention it.
Yeah, NLP was Bandler and Grindler's.
It means neuro-linguistic programming, which is quite a mouthful. But like, is this valid?
Yeah, I mean, I trained in NLP, and then I created my own brand of hypnosis and NLP. But Richard Bandler was practicing hypnosis in Texas, and I think he was a computer programmer at the time, but you needed a medical degree or a psychological degree to practice hypnosis in Texas. So one of the main reasons why he came up with NLP was so that he could get past that. But NLP and hypnosis is almost synonymous.
Okay. And it was very big in the dating community at some point. Like, have you had any contact with these people, the pickup artists who perhaps want to incorporate some of your teachings?
Well, I'm actually getting on a little bit, so I'm not really into the pickup. But when I was younger, I have to admit, I did experiment with it. In fact, a lot of the techniques that I do teach business people, it's just the way it works the way it works up on the pickup side of things is you basically guide through people through a series of emotional states to get them to where you want them to be.
So what's the what would be an example, just to put things in context?
Well, for example, and this would work with businesses or anything. In fact, the first state, if you really want to attract somebody to you, whether it's business or whatever, you want them to get really curious about who you are and what it is. In the pickup stuff, some women need to feel a connection, and then they can move on to physical things. That's one of the things that you're talking about. There was a guy called Ross Jeffries who had speed seduction, and so the idea is to take people through these emotional states that would normally take longer over a period of time randomly. So you take them through curiosity, feeling being connected, and then into the sexual, physical side of things. That's basically how that worked. And there's a parallel to the sales process where there's a sales relationship that goes on, and sometimes it can go on for months and months and months, and it can happen haphazardly. People find things out about you haphazardly, information if you like, things that they need to know in order to move through the different stages to become, first of all, receptive to your message, and then see the benefits, and then get to the point where they want to sign up and choose you as the person to help them. And sometimes all these can take months, and sometimes all the questions aren't answered, and it never results in a sale. So one of the things I do when I work with my clients is I show them how to present their information, their conversations, etc., with an understanding of the process that people need to go through to get from the beginning to an actual sale. And I show them how to do it much quicker, take them through it really much quicker, and to make sure each part's answered. And also, they answer it inside their own heads. You don't answer it for them. And that's the powerful thing. Because they're doing it inside their own heads, there's no resistance to it.
So could you elaborate on that final point?
Well, for example, one of the techniques I teach is a thing called the Hypnotic Bullet. And the Hypnotic Bullet, the whole idea or the concept of Hypnotic Bullet is if you could imagine I had a gun, right, and it was a persuasion gun, and it could fire bullets of pure persuasion straight into your mind that would then move through your body and light up every cell with desire or want to do business with you, right? Okay, that's a very idealistic
powerful stuff.
view. Yeah, maybe not go as much as that, but it's based on the fact that whenever you meet somebody, right, there's 5 questions that they are either consciously or unconsciously needing to get the answer to before they can move through to the next stage of becoming receptive to your message. And these 5 questions are: they need to know a little bit about you personally. Once somebody knows a little bit about you personally, then your ability to persuade them goes through the roof. And if you see talent programs on the telly like the X Factor or Britain's Got Talent and things like that, they always have little cameos where they show one of the singers or one of the acts. It shows a little bit about their personal life. It lets them into some personal stuff that's going on, and that's so that you like them and trust them much quicker. So they need to know a little bit about you, right? And the second question people are asking: why should I listen to this person, right? The third thing is they need to know the credibility. Where's the credibility? The next question they need to know is what's in it for this person, and then finally, the question they need answered: what's in it for me? And each of these questions can be thought of a doorway, right? And as these doorways are opened and these people answer these questions, you get to a point where they can be much more receptive to the idea of doing business with you, or maybe you're trying to sell them an idea or help them change or whatever. They can become much more receptive to that, right? And so what I teach people to do in conversations or in or in official presentations, I teach them to structure their information in such a way that these questions are answered right up front really fast. And also, we don't directly answer these questions. We structure our information so that people can go inside their own heads and answer these questions for themselves. And when somebody basically goes inside their heads, they go into trance. And that's basically what it is. But it's just basically taking people through the natural emotional states that they need to be in order to get to a point to consider doing business with
I
you.
think I recognize some steps in the media narrative because it's very, very much about trust. I remember, and it gets very cringy in Australia for some reason in the last few days. I don't know why this particular. Like I met a lot of Australians in London when I was living, and they all seem very open, carefree, kind of cool people. So it's like the last country that I would think this would happen. But I could say about the same about Ireland, the Irish that I've met. It would be the last country that such, but it's the first country for some reason. There was in Australia and New Zealand, I think Prime Minister of New Zealand, who was hailed as being this, younger woman. Very fitting to this narrative that you mentioned, Brian, this whole very woke agenda. She was hailed by global media initially for her gender, and then she has come down very hard on the whole lockdowns, and she is on camera talking to the people, her people, as a prime minister, saying, "We are your single source of truth. Everything else that you hear must be taken with suspicion." I think she said with a grain of salt or something. Which is a very strange statement to say from the government, like we are your single source of truth. But it fits very well with this, just establishing this unbreakable sense of trust. We are your lifeline, correct?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're seeing there is somebody moving away from politics and becoming a religion, the only source of truth.
Yeah.
So you're actually seeing a religion and a cult manifesting when people talk like that.
Yeah, and just with your knowledge, which seems very, very structured actually, and I like how your hypnosis is not this proverbial, snap my fingers and you'll
Hmm.
bark like a dog or something. It's much more ingrained in language, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, where do you see this whole thing being taken? Because the way you just described your process is very much a step by step approach towards a desired end. Just guesswork, seeing what's happening on media. Where do you think it's going?
Well, again, if I think about the whole notion of duality, right? You can't have one without the other. There's I believe eventually that this is going to fall apart and something good will come out of it because you can't have one side of the spectrum without the other. So I think that, just for example, we just spoke about how politicians are now moving away from politics and rational thinking, and they're moving towards becoming a religion. It's the same with all this stuff, all this kind of control. I believe at some point will be the source of more freedom. It's just my belief and my gut feeling, and so I don't think that they will succeed taking us right down this dystopian route. I think that it's going to fall apart because just through nature and the nature of duality. But the thing that does concern me is the amount of damage that's going to happen before we come out the other side. There might be some tough times ahead, but I believe ultimately we'll come out the other side better and stronger.
Well, this is an excellent note, I guess, to bring this conversation to a close. There's just one more lingering question that I kind of saved for last. Like, because we're trading in this land of the mystical, does God come into question in your mind?
Um, I do. I am quite a spiritual person, but I don't believe in any religious systems. I believe religious systems were created in the world of form, whereas your spirituality, if you really want to get in touch with it, it happened before thought, before emotions, before consciousness. It, 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 it happened before man, if you like, and I believe that all religious systems are just systems to control and have some kind of influence over the masses.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very similar. I mean, politics was the next evolution to do that, and so um, if you want to think about God as the source of where we come from, yeah, I do believe that there is a universal intelligence.
Mm-mm-mm. Great, great. So, yeah, I think, like I said, this is a great point to bring this conversation to a close. So, in this case, I want to thank you again, Brian. I'm going to post your links below in this interview. And I think you enlightened a lot of people that were just wondering what on earth is going on.
Uh-huh.
So thank you. Hope we'll have another of these chats in the near future. But until that moment, farewell, and we shall speak very soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise. So I'm just gonna press stop. Please don't close the browser as of yet.